This week's Planet Normal stowaway is Lord David Frost, the former diplomat turned Boris Johnson's Chief Brexit Negotiator, who now sits as a Conservative in the House of Lords. A returning Planet Normal guest, Lord Frost has a degree from Oxford in French and History and enjoyed a long Foreign Office career, becoming Ambassador to Denmark and Private Secretary to the head of the Diplomatic Service. In later life, Frost has not only served in the political trenches during the Brexit wars after the 2016 vote, as plenty of MPs, including some Tories, tried to reverse Brexit before it had been implemented, he's also emerged as a leading thinker and power broker as the Tories try to reinvent themselves following Labour's July 2024 landslide and, of course, the growing challenge from reform. David, it's great to have you back with us here on Planet Normal.
Great to be here.
The rocket of right thinking.
Absolutely.
So Keir Starmer, he's just done this UK-EU reset. What do you think?
Well, it's even worse than I thought it was going to be honest. I knew it was going to be bad because of the way he approached it. You know, it was obvious that he was going to throw one concession after another out. It was obvious the main aim was just to get closer to the EU, kind of whatever. And he's achieved that. It's bad for the country. But, you know, for those in the Labour Party who want to get back in the club, this is a good deal for them.
And it strikes me, dynamic alignment, we have to accept the EU's rules with no vote. Doesn't that make life more difficult for us, given that we've got other trade deals which don't allow that?
Well, it does, and this is one of the things that, you know, has yet to come out of this discussion. If we are if we're allowing another country to set our trade rules, then how can we negotiate about those rules with a third country? It makes no sense. We don't have control over them, and the whole point of Brexit was to take back control. So I do worry, actually, this is going to start unravelling some of the trade deals we've already done, the CPTPP, the Pacific one, the Indian one. Who knows?
I think, to be fair, Lord Frost, to Keir Starmer, he did say he would stop the boats, but we didn't know he meant British fishing boats. He's certainly going to stop those. Just talking about the fishing, which seems to be one of the most contentious issues, it's the case, is it, that by next year we were going to be back to full rights over our own waters? And now he's done this extraordinary thing, supposedly a negotiation, but some would see it as an abject capitulation, which is giving them 12 years. Is that correct?
That's right. So we agreed that we would get back full rights over our waters in June next year, in 2026. And meanwhile, we got 25% extra quota. So fishermen got something pending that. And now all that's been lost. That 26 date has been moved out to 2038, well beyond the kind of investment cycles of, you know, fishing boats and so on. So it's very difficult to see how the industry, you know, really gets going after this, because, you know, they know they can't increase the size of the catch, they can't increase the size of the market, they know the terms are set. Why are people going to invest in boosting the British fish industry after this?
Can I just say, is it also the case, coming back slightly to what Liam was talking about, which is that should a reform government get in 2029 and they say, right, we're not having this fishing deal, are we then bound, you know, in that EU tentacles to pay something to get out of it, or does it then become difficult for a right-wing government to come in and reverse it again?
Well, that's one of the things that we can't be 100% clear how that would work, because we don't have a legal text. We've only got like a political agreement saying this is going to happen. You know, we have to see how Labour actually negotiated. Do they negotiate a withdrawal clause that allows us to do it or not? If they don't, and I wouldn't be surprised if they don't, then we just have to do it anyway. And, you know, there'll be another sort of round of retaliation or whatever. But nevertheless, it's necessary. And that's why I think it's so important that both Reform and Kemi actually have said they will reverse this deal. We need to make that clear now, so we have the moral authority when we come back to it in 4 years.
You know, when you hear broadcasters talk about this deal and EU-UK shenanigans in general, they always talk about the fishing industry with a kind of disdain, as, oh, it's only a small part of the economy. Actually, these fishing communities, they support huge coastal areas And some of the worst poverty in this country, I'm right in saying, is just inland from what were once thriving fishing communities.
That's right.
So it's completely wrong. And, Labour are going to get absolutely hammered in the West Country now and up on the east coast of Scotland. It's as if they don't care. And you get kind of snorting posh broadcasters saying, it comes down to the price of fish, as long as we get our pet passports. I mean, for God's sake, I literally chucked something at the radio hearing the coverage when the deal was announced. Let's talk a little bit about some of the other aspects of the deal. Defence procurement. It looks as if the UK is going to have to pay in order to tender for defence procurement. Do we really have to do that? If we've got the best companies, if they need our stuff that's generated by our world-class high-tech arms industry, then surely they should buy it anyway.
Well, it sounds like we're going to have to pay. I mean, that's what you might think in a kind of normal business environment, that you would just contract and tender and that's how it would be done. But no, the EU set up their own scheme. They're borrowing to fund it. I don't know how that, whether we'll have to take on some of that liability as well. And we're going to have to pay in. That's clear from what EU member states have said. And that really could be quite a lot of money.
And how much of a disaster is it that in the fine print we seem to have signed deals that undermine other deals? We could be sued, couldn't we? The country could be sued because we're violating the terms of the, as you called it earlier, the CPTPP, the Trans-Pacific Partnership, one of the biggest trading blocs in the world, set to be bigger than the EU in just a few years' time. And it's my understanding, David, that you're more expert than me, that any deepening now of the US trade deal is also jeopardised by these dynamic alignment rules.
Yeah, it certainly is, because one of the things the Americans most want out of a trade deal with us is more agricultural access. The big problem with that is EU rules on agriculture, where we've just signed up to them and we can't change them.
And they're massively protectionist, of course.
Exactly.
Europe's very, very powerful agricultural lobby.
So how are we going to negotiate? And I just don't see that. And it's interesting. I had expected that they would have lined up, the government would have lined up people, spokesmen from some of the CPTPP countries, maybe from India, maybe elsewhere, saying, we're fine with this deal, it doesn't affect it. I haven't heard any of that. And it does make me wonder what they're thinking.
We're all three of us battle-scarred veterans of the Brexit wars, aren't we? And it did make me feel, what's the opposite of nostalgic? It made me remember. Do you remember when David Cameron went off to Europe with his little begging cap?
Yeah.
And was going to come back from Denmark and wherever else he went with all this proof that these nice Europeans were going to really give us special terms to not vote, leave. He basically came back with, you can pay us more money, for which would be marginally less horrible to you, I think was basically the arrangement. So this thing, David, they're not calling it freedom of movement, God forbid, but youth experience scheme, even though youth goes up to 30, which many of us don't think of that as children. So youth experience sounds nice and wholesome, doesn't it? All these lovely Italian kids from Perugia coming over and spending a bit of money in the British Museum. What struck me immediately, being a sort of cynical old Brexit warrior, was that Angela Merkel let 1 million Syrians into Germany. So any Syrian in Germany or Turkish person who's aged under 30 could just come across to us on the youth experience scheme, and Germany and other countries now want to get rid of their migrants. So is that likely that we'll end up with loads of those here?
Once again, we've got to see the terms, but it's definitely a risk. Many of those Syrians and others will have got German nationality by now, or German travel rights, and we won't have a basis to exclude them if the deal allows for it. I find it very strange, I must admit, that the government's willing to go down this road. I mean, it's a time when even Keir Starmer has clocked that we do need to get immigration down somewhat. That he's just agreed to this, tens of thousands, maybe 100,000 plus. Well,
they're not saying this. At the moment, he's saying no cap, isn't he? But what does that mean? Do they, presumably the EU doesn't want a cap?
Yeah, he said in the House yesterday, I think, that there would be a cap, but the text doesn't say there'll be a cap. It just says the number has to be agreed by both sides, acceptable to both sides. Well, we just discovered that 12 years fish trade transition was acceptable to the UK. We agreed it. That's not the same. So these things are not the same thing.
We only knew about it at the very last minute, didn't we?
We only knew on Saturday night. That's what I'm told.
And at a time when we have a lot of our own young people are unemployed. So are we going to have lots of, I'm not decrying it, because in some ways mobility of young people is great, but what we could be looking at is jobs are scarce. Liam and I often talk on the podcast, we're seeing a lot of hospitality vacancies, for example, going down. So and my kids,
we only talk on the podcast, not in real life. She doesn't like me in real life.
No, I don't. No. Yeah. But that we then see some of our own young people competing with kids from Europe.
That is one of our biggest problems, that young people can't get onto the labour market, won't come onto the labour market for whatever reason. So what do? We make it more difficult by importing a lot of Europeans. It's not so much the principle, although I don't like the principle, but really is it the moment? It just isn't the moment for this scheme.
Yeah. No. Tin-eared at best.
Yeah.
Let's talk about how the Tories should respond to Brexit. This Brexit renegotiation, as we move into talking about the Tories in general. Kemi Badenoch, she might be a bit worried about making the Tories look as if they're a bit deranged, going on and on about Brexit, banging on about Europe, as David Cameron once famously said. What would you advise us to do now?
So I think she needs to do more than she's done already, to be honest. She said
in response to this deal
and generally on European policy. I mean, she said she will reverse this deal. Good. What we need to do is reverse more than that, reverse some of the kind of underlying dynamics that's led to the problems we've got. And in particular, she needs to say we're going to go back to the Windsor Framework, the Northern Ireland arrangements, and get rid of them as well by negotiation if we can, if unilaterally if we can't. Because the big problem that those generate is that because Northern Ireland's part of the single market for goods, part of EU customs, every time we change our rules in GB, it opens the gap between GB and Northern Ireland. So there's this tremendous pressure just to stick with EU arrangements all the time to avoid that gap opening up. And that means
as the EU planned all along, right?
Absolutely.
When you were negotiating with them, this was a raw point and they wanted to rub salt into that wound, if you like.
Totally. Let's not forget, the BBC catching on camera somebody in the team saying we've now got our first colony of the Northern Ireland deal.
That's right.
That's really how it is. So I know it's awkward. I know, there's weariness about it. I know people in Britain often don't like thinking about Northern Ireland and see it all a bit complicated and difficult. But either this is one country governed by UK laws, or it isn't. And at the moment, it isn't. And I don't think that's a stable situation. So she needs to start talking about it and getting people.
Do you think she's got the guts to do that? Do you think she's got the guts to reopen the Windsor Framework?
Well, I hope so. She voted against one of its piece of secondary legislation a few months back, but more recently she said she doesn't think it's a priority when she went to Northern Ireland. So I don't know, as with so much else.
Coming to the actual state of the Tory party, one of your former ministerial colleagues said to me after that drubbing at the general election, yes, Allison, we lost badly, but maybe not badly enough. And I'm not going to give much away there,
coy.
She said they still haven't learnt. They're still a kind of arrogant, just obliviousness. And I recall, absolutely astonishingly, this is part of my David, actually, I should say to Planet Normal listeners that Lord Frost has accused me of being a bit too reformy recently, which we'll come on to. But you were not even considered suitable to be a candidate for the Conservative Party at the general election, presumably being a bit dangerously far right.
Yeah.
David, let's be honest, shall we? Because we are now, Conservatives are staring down the barrel of oblivion, I think. Have they learnt the lesson, or are they still doing this, if we'd only been a bit more unified, lots of people would have voted for us?
I think they still haven't really clocked what the problem is, if I'm honest. I think up till maybe these locals and the latest round of polling, I think the dominant view was just, we just got to wait. It'll come right. People will turn back to us. Labour are terrible. Reform will blow up. It will, we don't really have to do anything. It'll all be okay. I think the locals and then these latest polls that put us fourth are beginning to spook people a bit, and rightly so, in my view. The idea that reform is a wasted vote is no longer true to the same extent. Probably won't be true at all soon. And I must say, I struggle sometimes to see kind of what you get when you vote Conservative. What's the USP? I'm not a lifer Conservative. I only came into it, as you were saying, because I wanted to get Brexit done. For me, the political parties on the right are vehicles for getting the right policies in place. And as soon as they fail to get the right policies in place, well, they become a bit pointless. And, if you're a strong Conservative, you've got reform. If you're a sort of social liberal who doesn't mind high taxes and likes the environment and so on, you've got the Lib Dems. What are you getting with the Conservatives that you don't get with anybody else? And that is their strategic difficulty.
Yes.
It strikes me that the Tories parliamentary party, they seem to think that the centre ground, the Overton window, if you like, of where the election will be won and lost is somewhere between Ed Davey and Kemi Badenoch. It actually strikes me that where the election will be won and lost, where a lot of the electorate is now, is somewhere between Kemi Badenoch and Nigel Farage. And I personally think the Tory leader, for all her merits and all her instincts, which I think are very good, she's too concerned about keeping her parliamentary party happy rather than keeping that centre ground of where the electorate is happy, where the Tories are going to win or lose the election, between her and reform. It strikes me that she needs to start saying things that are a lot more reformy and start saying them before Nigel Farage does.
Totally. I think the only future for the Conservative Party is as a strongly conservative, not far right, but strongly, meaningfully principled Conservative party. And at the moment nobody can see that, partly because we don't say it and partly because we've got a substantial contingent in the party.
She's petrified of the parliamentary party having rows with itself, and that's why she's constantly mollifying Tory MPs who are actually Lib Dems.
I think so, and the row has got to come. We will not. The thing I hear most from potential reform voters and people I talk to is, why should we believe you this time? You had 14 years. Look at what you did. What a mess it was. Mostly. Why should we believe you this time? And until we get rid of some of the people who are responsible for some of those errors, why should they believe us? I don't know.
I absolutely agree with you, David. And I've been thinking more and more about this because although I have, voted Conservative, I now want our country to be saved. I'm not much bothered about the vehicle. So all the arguments, reforms, falling out amongst people and Rupert Lowe and so on, I don't care. I literally want a government that does what the voters have asked it to do. And we are seeing reform now. Astonishing polling numbers, aren't we? Over 30. If they go up, I think, to about 33 or 34, they could be looking at, because it tips then, doesn't it? The first part of the post, we could be looking at a very serious majority. So instead of it being, will the Conservative Party deign to have an electoral pact with reform? It's like, will Nigel Farage do Kemi the favour of saving her a few seats in Sussex? Do you see some sort of pact becoming more and more realistic?
I not in the short run, because I can't see the pressures that generate it. Both sides still think they can win to be the mainstream party of the right, but it is still as a matter of logic, if we go into the election, if the right goes into the election divided, it's going to lose. That's just inevitable. Therefore, either one party has to absorb the other and the other has to disappear, and I think it's an open question now how that plays out, or there has to be some sort of agreement. And if there's a 50-50 split going into the election, then maybe there'll be a pact, and if there's an 80-20 split, perhaps there won't.
Last question, David. Time goes so fast when you're having fun. The Tories don't seem to want you to be a candidate for MP, despite your credentials, despite your appeal to a lot of the electorate, certainly to a lot of Planet Normal listeners. Would you rule out standing for reform?
Ooh, I was going to ask that. Oh, he's blushed.
So
he's blushed.
I'm waiting. I think that, as I said, what I want is, a last chance really for a party on the right that can deliver meaningful right-wing principled policies. I'm not emotionally committed to the Conservatives in the way that others are. I want the party that is going to do the job and get the job done, and let's see how that plays out.
It's not a no. It's not a no.
Lord Frost.
He loves us, really.
The best Frost since the Great Frost, as somebody once
Somebody
said.
once
Who was
said.
that? Thanks a lot for appearing again on Planet Normal.
Thank you.
Thank you.